Welcome to the Center for Jewish History's Family History Today series of genealogy-themed public programs. My name is Moria Amit, and I am the Senior Genealogy Librarian at the Center for Jewish History. The Center provides a collaborative home for 5 partner organizations that together form the largest archive on the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. In addition, the Center houses the Ackman and Ziff Family Genealogy Institute, which strives to connect researchers to a wealth of genealogy resources at the center and to make family history accessible to people of all ages, abilities, and levels of experience, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. We look forward to announcing our reopening plans for the Genealogy Institute in the near future. But in the meantime, our genealogy librarians are still working remotely and are eager to assist you with your research. You may continue to engage with us in the following ways. Please tune in to our monthly Genealogy Coffee Break webinars for a brief dive into a specific genealogy topic. These air on the second Tuesday of every month at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the Center's Facebook page. You may also email us at gi@cjh.org to ask for advice on your research questions at any time. Lastly, I hope you had the opportunity to see the announcements of some of our upcoming programs before I began speaking. To learn more about these or other future programs, check out our program calendar at programs.cjh.org. A few technical notes before we get started. You may have noticed that your microphone is muted and that the chat box has been disabled. To send us your questions and comments, please use the Q&A box, which you should find on the bottom or right side of your screen. And note that our guest speaker will be answering your questions during the dedicated Q&A period at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to view the captions for this program, click on the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen. And finally, this program is being recorded and will be viewable on the Center for Jewish History's website and YouTube channel within the next month. In addition, our speaker has graciously created an accompanying handout, which I will be emailing to everyone tomorrow. So please stay tuned for that. Okay, so on to the subject of today's talk. I'm really happy to introduce Lisa Alzo today. She is a freelance writer, instructor, and internationally recognized lecturer, specializing in writing your family history and Eastern European genealogy research. Lisa earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in nonfiction writing from the University of Pittsburgh and is the author of 11 books, including the award-winning 3 Slovak Women and hundreds of magazine articles. Lisa is has been an avid genealogist for more than 30 years and chronicles her own family history adventures on her blog, theaccidentalgenealogist.com. And last but not least, Lisa works as an online educator and writing coach through her website, researchwriteconnect.com. For more information on Lisa, please visit lisaalzo.com. And without further ado, thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us today, and please take it from here.
Great. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and this is my favorite topic, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully everything will look good. I'm sure you'll let me know if it doesn't. Let's go full screen here. And again, my name is Lisa Alzo. I'm a writer, I'm a genealogist, and so today I get to talk about both topics, which I'm very excited about. So I'm going to go off camera while I speak, and then I'll come back on for the Q&A. So this is Show, Don't Tell, Creative Nonfiction Writing for Genealogists. And what I'm going to talk about in this brief time we have together is how to go beyond names, dates, and places in your writing, how to share stories in an interesting and compelling way, and using nonfiction writing techniques to produce a can't put down, page-turning family history. And so just a little bit of quick background on myself. The introduction was wonderful, but I was a writer before I was a genealogist. I had been writing for quite a while. And when I went for my Master's of Fine Arts in Nonfiction Writing at the University of Pittsburgh, I needed a topic for my thesis. And at the time, I was taking a course called The Literature of Pittsburgh, and I was reading a book called Out of This Furnace. And that is a 1947 novel by Thomas Bell, Bell. And it was a fiction book based on his Slovak family. And it was about 3 generations of Slovak men working in the steel mills of Braddock, Pennsylvania. And I grew up in a small town, Duquesne, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, that wasn't far from Braddock, Pennsylvania, where the book was mostly set. And I could identify with a lot of the things in this book, but what I wanted to capture was actually the woman's story, because so much was focused on the men. And at that same time, I started asking my mother questions about my immigrant grandparents. I knew my maternal grandparents. My grandfather died when I was 9, but my grandmother I knew till I was in college, and I never once asked her any questions about her life or her story. And that is my biggest regret. But thankfully, my mother knew a lot of the details. So I started doing research, and my research, I had to do the old fashioned way. This was before the internet. So I did a lot of family history interviews. I traveled to places. I did library research, courthouse research, and more traditional genealogy. And so I spent a lot of time researching my grandmother's story. She came to the US in 1922 from what was then Czechoslovakia. And so I decided that I wanted to write my thesis about my grandmother's story. And then eventually I did turn the thesis into a book called 3 Slovak Women. So when we write family history, when we start researching, sometimes we have a specific goal in mind, or sometimes, as most people will find out, that they discover information or stories that surprise them, or that they just didn't know about. And so that's the beauty of family history. And I think it's really important not only to do the research, but to write that story, write those stories in a compelling way. So it's not just a list of names, dates, and places. And so I had written my book, 3 Slovak Women, and I focused on my mother's side of the family. And what was interesting is I didn't know much about my dad's side of the family, even though my grandparents were Slovak immigrants as well. And but my grandfather died before I was born, and my grandmother died when I was 2. So my dad, had 3 sisters that lived to adulthood, and I didn't really know much about that side of the family. And I was talking to my father about my grandparents, and I asked him, what do you know about your grandparents? Did you know anything about them? And my dad said, no, I don't know anything about them. And I said, well, did your parents ever talk about them? No, they never talked about it. I really, can't help you. And then he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, what do I care about those people? They're dead. I didn't know them. And I was taken aback by this response. So it comes back to this question, why bother? So, my father said, he appreciated the work I had done on the 3 Slovak Women book. And he said, that's a lot of work. I couldn't do it, but he said, I really can't help you. I don't know anything about, the family. And so as I listened to him and as I started doing research on my own, thankfully I was able to discover a lot more details. And eventually I was actually able to reconnect with family in Slovakia from my Alzo side during a trip there in 2010. And I actually think if my father had lived, he passed away in 2005, 2 years after we had this conversation. I think if he had lived and he knew I'd found living relatives, I think he would have been interested. But a lot of our family members sometimes maybe respond like this. They don't connect with the past, and as family historians and genealogists, we get excited and we do that research and we find the stories, but then it's our job to turn these stories into interesting narratives that the future generations will want to read. So when I talk about writing, I like to consider it a journey. Just as your genealogy research is a journey and you may spend a long time uncovering those facts, I think that writing is really something that it's just not something you can do in a hurry or want it to be done all of a sudden. I think there is a journey, there is a process. And a lot of times when I teach family history writing classes, or when I speak to people about writing the family stories, people say, well, I have to wait for that inspiration to strike, or, I've hit, writer's block, or I don't know how to start, and I always say that if you're sitting around waiting for the inspiration, you're probably going to be waiting a long time. So sometimes maybe we do get excited about ancestors and we want to write their stories, but a lot of times we need some prompting. We need to really sit down and think about what we're going to write. And I like to think of family histories as doing 3, maybe 4 things. So first of all, they inform. So we will tell future generations who the people are in our family tree. We generally include the names, the dates, the places, the interesting events. So we're sharing information. But I also think that family history should engage. So it shouldn't just be a litany of facts. It should really draw the reader in and capture their attention. And also, hopefully, family histories will enhance the lives of others who read what you write. Hopefully, it enhances your life to do the research. And we all have happy stories, sad stories, painful stories, interesting stories. We all have things in our family background, but hopefully by doing the research and by sharing it with others, it will enhance your own life in some way and that of others. And I know my family greatly appreciates all the work that I had done to uncover my grandmother's story and to share that in a format that they can read and that they can enjoy. And then entertain, maybe. We're writing, as I said, unless you're writing a strict essay or factual paper, or you're not really creating a documentary. You want it to be somewhat entertaining, and that just means that people like reading it and feel that there's a purpose there. So these are some things that I like to think about when I sit down to write. And I really, truly want to stress that the family histories are more than just names, dates, places, boxes, lines, charts, or footnotes. Now, of course, when we're writing up our genealogy, when we're sharing our family story, having source citations and references and where we obtain that information is extremely important. So I'm not downplaying the use of footnotes or factual information. But what I want to say is that shouldn't be the focus of your family history book. And so there are ways to handle this. There are different ways to make sure you include that information, but that it just doesn't take over the entire book. And so when we prepare to write our family histories, most of the time we have years of research in many different formats. And I know I do. I have boxes of paper research. I have digital files. I have physical pictures, scan pictures. I have family tree charts. I have my grandparents' original passports. I have family documents that I've inherited because I am the family historian. But so many different formats for the types of research that I had conducted over the years. And then, I also had the family trees that I built. And so my job, I felt, was to transform those trees into interesting stories. And one of the things that I know that students or people who take my writing courses sometimes they'll sit in my presentations and they'll say, well, my ancestors weren't famous, they didn't do anything important, they're not a politician, or they're not related to royalty, or they're not somebody who invented something. Or a lot of times I encounter people who, like me, had average ancestors. I don't have any royal blood in my family. My ancestors were all Slovak peasants, and so it's interesting to think, well, there's nothing really interesting there to write about. But I always say that our ancestors lived through important historical events, so they are a part of history. Even their lives, they played a role, and so you just have to hone in on those key events that were a turning point in your own ancestors' family, in your own history. So, there's many ways to document family history, and so I'm talking, a lot about just writing the stories. Of course, now we have wonderful technology where we can do video and we can do all sorts of interesting recordings of things that happen. But when we're talking about writing, this talk is focused on using creative nonfiction to share stories. And so I was introduced, as I mentioned, to the concept of creative nonfiction when I was studying for my master's degree. And so I turned my thesis into my book, Three Slovak Women. And so it was a nonfiction book. And I set out at the beginning that I wanted to mix personal and historical. So as I did, initially, I did 6 years of research for this. And again, that was before the internet. So I had to do a lot of interviews, and I had to do a lot of traveling around and a lot of more paper research. And as I was finding out the information and writing it down and recording the interviews, I knew what form that this story would take, and I knew where I wanted to focus it. I wanted to start with my grandmother, then I wanted to bring in my mother, who was the first generation American, and then I wanted it to end with my own story of how I because of these two women, how I became who I was at that time, and the opportunities that they provided for me. So I wanted it to be more than just genealogy, but I also wanted to tap into a more universal story of experiences of a Slavic immigrant woman. So I wanted to take my grandmother's story and broaden it out a bit. And so I included a lot of social history and historical research mixed in with the family story. So I blended those together using creative nonfiction. And so basically, creative nonfiction, it's a genre of writing that it uses literary styles and techniques to create factually accurate narratives. So you're not making things up in this, you're sticking to the facts, but you're just using techniques to make the story interesting. So you may hear it referred to as literary nonfiction, new journalism, literary journalism. And maybe you are familiar with some of the representative authors like James Baldwin and Truman Capote and Ernest Hemingway and Tom Wolfe. So there are a lot of really great nonfiction authors that I studied when I was in my program at the University of Pittsburgh. But basically, what it comes down to when you're doing creative nonfiction, the main principle, the fundamental principle is that you show, don't tell. So this is the challenge to you as a writer, to create that story, to use the facts and to use the techniques to make a very interesting story, to show what happened instead of telling. So now I want to just kind of talk about the writing part. And I know that a lot of people, especially when they're beginning, they may feel intimidated. So they may feel that it's too big of a task, or they don't even know where to start. And I just want to emphasize that you don't have to be a professional to write an interesting family story. So I studied the genre, and I went for a degree, and I've been writing, for a very, very long time, and more than 30 years. And I've just really write every day, and I feel comfortable with the craft, but not everybody is at that point. But I don't want you to get discouraged. And a lot of times I hear, well, I don't have all the facts, so I can't write the story. Well, you can actually start writing, even if you're still researching or still trying to find things out. So that should not slow you down. And a lot of people worry about how to tell the story. And as genealogists, we always, go, well, okay, when was the person born? When did they get married? When did they die? So we have these marker points as genealogists. And our stories don't necessarily have to go in that way. When you're doing creative nonfiction, you have more flexibility in how you tell a story. And also, try not to worry about the final product. Now, the thought of writing a 250-page book or a 300-page book, or however long you think it's going to be, can be quite intimidating. And so if we're trying to see the final product and not looking at each part, then I think we get ahead of ourselves, and that's where we struggle. And so I like to advise to just worry about, one section at a time, one ancestor at a time, one story at a time. And the more you practice, the more you will succeed. And so it's just like anything. If you're practicing your golf swing, or you're trying to perfect a baking technique, if you like to cook or bake, you just have to keep practicing until you get it exactly right. And so you must commit to do the writing. And I just want to say that even if you're out there thinking it's overwhelming, that you can do this. And so I like to think of the 3 T's. It's topic. You have to have a focused topic that you want to write about. You have to make the time to actually complete your project. And it is a commitment. And so you need to schedule that time. And then hopefully you can find some tools that will help you complete this task. And, because we live in the digital age, and because, we have computers and smartphones and tablets, the tools, have evolved. So, and a lot of people do still like to write with pen and paper initially, and that's fine too. But eventually you're going to have to get it into a digital format if you're going to publish it or share it. So, I know that some folks out there may still like an old-fashioned typewriter, and even some professional writers still like to do things that way. But eventually, because we're in this age, the digital age, we need to be able to be flexible with how we present our writing. So one of the things I want to just do is give you some tips. And the first thing is, you don't have to write one large narrative. And the prospect of a large book sometimes doesn't intimidate family historians. But I like to break tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. And one of the easiest things I think to do is to just start with profiles or character sketches of ancestors. And so you just go down your family tree and see how much you can write about each person. And that will give you these little pieces, these little sketches that can always go into a bigger narrative. But you can do that. Also write scenes, key life events. So there are a lot of ways to break this down. And one thing I like to do is to create a timeline for each ancestor or each family I'm writing about. And I think that that helps to place your ancestors in historical context, and it will help you see any holes or any gaps, or if you do have to go back and do some more research or find something else out, having a timeline to follow that person kind of gives you a structure to begin with. And so you can create a timeline very easily. If you're using genealogy software, a lot of those programs have a timeline feature. There are tools that you can find online to do timelines. You can use Excel if you like spreadsheets. You can use Microsoft Word. You can use all sorts of tools to create the timeline. And I did put some tools, some of my favorite tools I'd listed in the handout that you will receive. But it doesn't matter what you use, just so that you can keep track of what was going on in that person's life, and so you can follow the story. And so when I did my thesis, I had actually a poster board that I just wrote on. I had a large poster board, and that's how I did my timeline, because I didn't have the digital tools that we have today. So I also want to just kind of quickly go through the process. And generally, we're inspired to write about an ancestor. So the inspiration is there. You want to do it. Then you develop an idea. So for me, I decided I would write about my maternal grandmother. So the book was going to be 3 Slovak women. It was going to be that story of those 3 women. And then I created, an elevator pitch, which is basically just, if you're in an elevator with somebody and you have 30 seconds to tell them what your book is about, write a couple of sentences and give that example. Just write a few sentences. What is the story about? And then I always create a storyboard, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in a few minutes. But basically, a visual outline of what the story is going to be about. Then I sit down and write a first draft. Then I go through the revision process, and very few people, even professional writers, don't get it right the first time. So there's always that process of a revision or several revisions. But hopefully you'll get to the point then where you'll have a final product that you feel is good enough to share with your family, or to put it out as a book, publish it for others to read, maybe write a blog and post some of the information in as part of a blog, or however you want to share that story. So that is just a little bit about the process. Now, when we talk about elements of creative nonfiction, so we're looking at some of the literary devices. And so one of the big things is structure and how you put together your story. And so basically, structure is another word for your plot. And so a basic structure for stories, all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so you want to think about, what is your background? What is the setting? What is the routine? This is how you're setting up your story, and you're going to tell us a story. So this is called the exposition. You're going to tell us, who the main person is and what the basics of the story is. So you have to start the story somewhere. Then you usually have a middle, which is something like overcoming obstacles or trying to get something or solving a problem. So we call that the rising action. And then it comes to a climax. And then after that, you have an end or a resolution. And so in my story, I set the background, 3 Slovak women, of my grandmother being her birth in Slovakia, which was actually under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So I started it there. And then as she came to America and married, and so all these obstacles that she overcame, and then then the next generation came in. And then at the end, I sum it all up as to, why these two women were so important to me. So I have an end, and I put, my observations into it, and the new routines, the ways, based on the research I had done from the lives of these two women. So you just want to have a basic structure. And so a plot is a good story. Structures, how you arrange the events in desired order. And then you want to use as much description as possible. So good literary fiction, good fiction, has a lot of detailed description and details. And you want to try to incorporate details that appeal to the five senses. So sight, sounds, taste, smell, touch. And again, this can be a little challenging, and it depends on your story. And you may not have been there, or you may not have a first-hand account, but you can also use historical narrative to kind of set the scene as well. Dialogue, a speaker's exact words. Maybe you have some sort of dialogue to put in. Maybe you have a recording, or you have information from an ancestor, or maybe you have a diary where there's an excerpt of how they interacted with somebody. Not everybody has this, and sometimes dialogue isn't a part of the story, but it just depends on the research that you've done and what story you're trying to tell. But these are some of the key elements when you're writing fiction, when you're thinking about creative nonfiction, that will come into play. And then characterization, showing the characters. And I like to think of all of my ancestors as characters, and what are their characteristics and what makes them tick, and so on and so forth. And so when you're shaping this story, as you get it formulating, you want to select and emphasize. And as genealogists, we collect all sorts of facts and all sorts of details, but not everything might be critical to the story you're trying to tell. So you need to be selective, and then emphasize those parts that make the most sense for the story. And then you're sort of writing in scenes. So if you get used to doing this storyboard, it makes it a little bit easier to actually get the writing done. Now, when we talk about structure, you don't always have to start like so and so was born, and then so and so did this, and then they died. And you can start the story in the middle. So maybe the story that you're trying to tell is, say, maybe your father was made to be the breadwinner of the family at a young age because his father was killed in in a work accident or in a car accident or something like that. And so you want to start with the time in the middle of the story. So you might not necessarily start with the entire family history, but you would start with that important moment that would draw the reader in. So that's what I mean by start at the beginning of the end. So it's the end of somebody's life, but it's the beginning of a story. And then you want to use active narration. So again, this is just practice with writing and using active verbs. And I know it's difficult when we're writing about the past, but you want to avoid things like would have, could have, should have. And there are lots of trigger phrases that we always insert into our writing. And so the more active you make the narration, the more interesting it will be. And of course, you want to strive for truth. If you're writing nonfiction, then you want to make sure that you're not making things up. If you don't know something, don't make it up. Just say, I've done the research and I was unable to obtain this detail. But you don't want to make something up just to put it in there. So you have to make sure you're being truthful. And then you always like to identify an antagonist or a conflict. So that could be a person. Maybe it's a conflict between husband and wife, or father and children, or somebody in the community against whatever they were facing in terms of political repression, or conflict with the church or the whatever it might be, then you identify that antagonist. And then again, we come back to the show, don't tell. And the easiest way to learn how to do this is to read creative nonfiction. And so just a couple of suggestions that I wanted to give is most of us have either seen the movie or hopefully we've read the book In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And this was really a nonfiction novel. And so this was a groundbreaking work because Truman Capote saw this newspaper article in the New York Times and picked up, and he went and he did this immersion journalism where he interviewed people in the town, and he interviewed the people that were put in jail for the murders, and he got to know the feel of the town and really the whole community. Everything became part of the story. It wasn't just scenery. It was really entwined with the story, and the way he wrote it read like a novel. And so it was an amazing description and just really excellent character development and the way the story was paced. And so that's why it's kind of held up as the nonfiction novel, because he did use a lot of literary techniques in this book, but the facts were based on the research. And then another book I like to recommend to genealogists is a book called Annie's Ghost by Steve Luxenberg. And again, this combines a lot of family history, a surprise that Steve discovered that his mother had a sister, and how this impacted the family. And he writes about the discovery, and it's just a very heartfelt, very well written book. But it includes investigative journalism, and it includes excellent writing, and just a very, very good story at the heart of it. So I highly recommend this book as well. And then you can kind of get a sense of how these writers work their craft to tell their stories. So I want to kind of go back to the writing process now and just talk about some things that work well for me. And one of the things I like to always do, whether I'm writing an article or a book or whatever it is, I like to mind map the story, the idea. And so mind mapping is really popular in the business world. It's basically just a brain dump of what's in your head. And then from that mind map, I create an outline or a storyboard, and we'll talk about the differences in a minute. But you really want to just kind of start putting down the main events. As I said, having a timeline helps because you can pull that from your genealogy software or from whatever else you've created. So a timeline is really good for getting the sense of the story. And then, as I said, there's storyboards and there's outlines and there are mind maps. And outlines are really text-based that kind of just summarize key points of the story. Mind maps are random thoughts and ideas, so they're free form. And I usually just do this at the beginning because I have an idea in my head. I know who it's going to be about. I know what do I want to include. So I just start jotting down those ideas. And then the storyboards are more image-based. They're visual. And so this is just a sample image of what a mind map kind of looks like. And this came from mindmapmaker.org. But you have a central idea, and then anything that kind of pops into your mind related to that idea. And it's really just taking what's in your head and putting it on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard, or you can even do this in your computer. There are tons of digital programs that you can use to create mind maps. But then you can start connecting ideas. You can draw colored lines. You can see where sub themes developed or keywords that you want to use. And it really kind of just gets all the information that's stirring in your brain and gets it into a written or a digital format that you can then work with. And then I usually take that mind map and then turn it into either an outline or a storyboard. So some people like text outlines, where we learned this in school. You do A, then you do 1, 2, and then you do B, or you do, higher points as Roman numerals. So you have sections, and then you break it down. And so an outline, just kind of helps keep you on track and helps you to stay organized. And it sort of guides the structure of what it is that you're writing. And, I think outlines are very good. And if you like text based formatting, then of course, just doing this in Microsoft Word is very easy to do. But what I like to do is a storyboard, and it's more of a visual way to outline or map out the writing project. And it provides a roadmap, and it is something that is not written in stone, but you can add to it, delete, revise, and there's many ways to create a storyboard, and one size doesn't fit all. And so I like to use this when I write because I'm a very visual person. And so I want to get that bird's eye view of my project and then have a working structure, see where the holes are in what it is that I'm writing. And then I use a software program to do my storyboard, so I can actually have notes and ideas and source information in there as well. And I use that as a guidepost to create chapters and sections if I'm doing a larger project. So if you think about, your favorite movies, thinking about it cinematically, applying that to your story will help you visualize it. And it makes it a little bit easier when you're sitting down to write. So when I did my 3 Slovak Women book, I used the index card method, which I just got 3x5 index cards and wrote my ideas and key points down on those index cards. And then I put them up on a bulletin board, and then I could rearrange them and move them around. And so that was very helpful because I was able to see everything on the wall. But I now use a software program called Scrivener, which I'll show you in a minute in a future slide. But I use that to do my virtual index cards. So when I sit down to write, when I do this, I think about different ways to do it, like straight, do I want to do straight chronology, or do I want to do a flashback, or, am I jumping into the future as a flash forward? And the best example I can use of flash forward is if you've ever watched the show This Is Us on NBC, you'll get a sneak peek into what might happen to the characters, and then they go back and kind of then tell you how they got there. So you get these little flash forwards to kind of keep you interested. I usually don't use this in my own family history, but that is a technique that you can use. I have used flashback, which, as I said, it breaks into the story to show an earlier part of an action. And then the description, the images, the sight, sound, smells, I can write all these things on my storyboard and kind of keep notes of what I want to include. And then, as you're going through this, you may decide to supplement your project with memorabilia. Maybe you have certificates or recipes or newspaper clippings or illustrations, etc. If you're using any of this stuff and, it's, not in the public domain, if it's copyrighted, you definitely have to have permission to include it if you're gonna publish it and sell it or put it out there in a public forum. You want to have permission to use that. If you're doing things for your own family, you definitely want to include the citations of where everything came from, but you just have to be aware of copyright. And so that's something to be aware of when you're creating a book. Now I want to just quickly talk about the elevator pitch. So again, when I start a project, I then decide I want to have a single killer sentence or a hook. It's called a hook or a log line, or maybe one or two sentences that really, just concisely tells what this book is about. And so you want to include a central idea, maybe the main character or the person's name, maybe the time period or location or when it's taking place, or maybe include a core conflict of the story. And so when you're thinking of an elevator pitch, I like to tell people to think about the traditional Twitter, where you were limited to 147 characters and you had to keep the extraneous information to a minimum. So you want to write something that's really going to draw people in. And I have an example elevator pitch that it's not a family history project, but it's actually a project that I'm working on. It's not about my family, although it's a story that happened in the town I grew up in. But I have this book that I'm writing. And so I wrote, help police, I want the police, here's the police, bang, seeking revenge, rogue cop betrays badge friend, and community murders 5. So we know that there's a murder in this. We know that it involves this rogue cop and he's seeking revenge, and so it kind of sets the stage for intrigue. Oh, that might be an interesting story. So you just write this out, and you can change it, you can revise it, but this just kind of gives you an idea of what might be coming, what you're going to read. And then when you're doing these index cards, you don't want to use entire paragraphs or lots of text on them. You want to keep them concise and keep them to the point so that it just jogs your memory of what you're going to write about. So one scene, one event, or a major point per index card. When you're doing the virtual cards, it makes it easier. And so when you actually start to write, after you do all of your organization, you want to just sit down and start writing. If you have facts that you need to fill in, I just recommend putting a note, putting brackets, and then just keep writing. Don't let it slow you down, and don't worry about how it all fits together. Just kind of write each section, and then give yourself permission to write a bad first draft. We don't all get it right on the first time around. And so I know that that's hard, especially if you're a perfectionist and you could sit there in front of your screen and labor over how it's going to sound or how it all fits together. But I think the important thing is to get something down that you can work with. And that's how I approach my writing, because some of my first drafts, when I go back to read them, I'll think, what was I thinking? But there's always a seed of the text that I can use and work off of. And so there are a lot of challenges. It's too big of a job. It's too difficult. I don't have enough time, but I'm not a writer. And, I say that you can overcome all of these challenges and you can do it. So I'm going to show you an example of a project that I'm actually working on, and from my own family history. And then I'm going to show you the different components, the mind map, the storyboard, etc. So like many genealogists, I have tons of family photographs and different pieces of information. And so my father, as I mentioned, I showed you his picture earlier on in this presentation. He wasn't interested in genealogy. He knew nothing about his grandparents. But two things that my father would talk about were his service in World War II. He was in the Navy, and his years playing basketball. So my father played basketball from when he was in junior high school all the way up till he was about 50 years old. And he played in semi-professional leagues throughout Western Pennsylvania. And he had this huge scrapbook of newspaper clippings. And they were a real treasure. And I found them. And before he died, we sat down and talked about them. And I said, why didn't you tell me that you had all of this information and all, you were such an outstanding basketball star. And I knew he had played, but I didn't know that he was in the newspapers. And he said, oh, I was going to wait for somebody else to tell you. My father didn't like to brag. He was very low key kind of person, but there was so much in here. And so I've, scanned them. I've had pictures and photographs, and he played for so many different teams. He played for Duquesne High School, then he played for the United Steelworkers, and then he played for the CIO League, and just so many other teams. And so before he died, he told me some stories about what it meant to him to play basketball and how much he loved the sport and all the friendships he made and so forth. And so, I have a lot of history in this scrapbook. And so I scanned, and I have photos and I have his yearbook and I have all the details. And so I even have a picture of him in junior high school when he started and so forth. And so all of this information is in different formats and I had to put it together. So I decided I wanted to write a book, and I kind of just gave it a tentative title called Set Shot, but that might not be the real title that I'm going to end up with. But I just wrote, this book will be a tribute to my father and his love for the game of basketball, and how through my discovery of his achievements on the court, I learned about his life and our relationship and the way he just approached life in general. And so basketball was kind of a metaphor, a theme for, how he kind of lived his life. And so I did a mind map, and I just did this. I actually did this on my iPad. I, wrote on it. And so I wrote things, the central theme was my father and his basketball playing days. And then things that came into mind as I looked through the scrapbook, photographs and pictures and the teams that he played for and the lifelong friendships that he made. And he always said, shoot your best shot, whether it's in life or on the court. You just shoot your best shot. Sometimes, it goes in and sometimes it bounces out and you've got to try again. And so all of these things I did a mind map for, so that I kind of had an idea of different things I wanted to include. And then I did a virtual corkboard. I did my index cards, and I used a program called Scrivener, Scrivener. And it's a program that costs about $49, and it's for Windows or Mac. You can do a free trial. There's a free 30-day trial that's non-continuous. So if you start it today and don't pick it up until next week, then the next time you open it, you're on day 2, but you can try it for free. And what it lets you do is set up this virtual corkboard where you can put keywords, key phrases, and you can add images in, you can add text in, and it kind of gives you a sense of how your story is going to be organized. And what's nice is you can take these virtual index cards and drag and drop them, move your story around, and then you get a text equivalent of that story. And so it really helps you to get that bird's eye view, to see the project. And so then this is what the other part of the software looks like. On the left-hand side, you have a binder, which organizes all of your sections into chapters, in scenes. You've got a research folder where I can drag images in, or PDF files, or whatever I want to include to write from. Then I can start typing. So the middle screen looks like Microsoft Word or a word processing document. And then I can start typing. So from my index card, then I'd go into the text and I'd write something. So I wrote, Johnny Alzo first touched a real basketball when he was around 12 years old. His older sisters gave him the 75 cents to get a membership to the Carnegie Library in Duquesne, where all of the boys and young men went to play ball. He first played the game as a young boy with a makeshift backboard, and a small rubber ball. Johnny and his friends would fasten a galvanized water bucket with a hole in the bottom to a telegraph pole on his street and shoot the rubber ball through it. They didn't go to the local sporting goods store to buy a basketball. Instead, they scoured the banks of the local river after a storm for old balls that would wash up, or sell scrap metal to buy a ball at the local 5 and dime store. But once he got the real ball in his hands, there was no stopping him. Johnny went on to be a standout on the Duquesne High School basketball team and played semi-professional ball until the age of 37, setting several scoring records along the way. So this is just a sample piece of text that I took from my mind map, took from my research, and I just started writing. And so again, I would go back and I'll revise it, and I'll fix it, and I'll change it, and I'll move things around. But by using Scrivener, I can do this very easily, all in the same program. And then I can export the file. I can compile it into a Word document or a PDF document or other formats. And so it's a very powerful program, but I wanted to show you it mostly for the storyboard. One of the things I also did, and I've been working on this project a very long time, but I'm still working on it. But one of the things I did way back when is I set up a private blog on Blogger for this, and that kind of gave me an incentive to get all of the initial components of this project done, which was scanning the images and getting some of the sections of the text all set together. And so as you can see, it is a process, it's a journey. And so for me, by breaking the tasks into smaller pieces, it's enabled me to work on this on and off throughout the years. And I'm finally getting to a point where I feel comfortable getting a final version. But one of the things I did is, and I advise you, is to set parameters, break the task into smaller pieces, schedule time to write. And so I can tell you from experience, this is something that has helped me over the years. Sometimes it's really difficult for me to find time to work on my own family history projects because I'm doing webinars like this one, or I used to be traveling a lot to conferences. I have other writing commitments, professional work that I do. And so it's really hard to focus on my own family history. So I try to even just do 15 minutes per day. I'll open up my Scrivener program and I'll write a couple of sentences, or I'll write a citation out, or I'll do something in that 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be great writing. It doesn't have to be complete, but just that I've worked on it. And, we can all find 15 minutes. And so that's what I try to do. I set a timer, an alarm. Sometimes I use edit lock tools, which means you can find some tools on the web that will let you fix your screen so that you can't do anything else. So you can't be on social media, or you're just focused on the writing. And I did put some of these in the handout. There's one called Write or Die 2, which is really high end edit log tool, where you type in how many words you want to accomplish and how long. And then if you don't reach that goal, it erases everything that you've written. And so I put that in the handout. But sometimes, you need to just sit down and write when you don't feel like it. And sometimes we're not motivated to do it, but you need to just keep moving forward on the project. And I always try to say, I'm not going to wait for the muse. I don't want to get into that inspiration trap. So I try to do as much as I can in those 15 minutes. And some days I can do more, but at least if I get the 15 minutes in, I know I'm putting a chunk of writing in for that entire week. And so you also want to have a writing checklist. And so that is, sit down and think about, is my writing concise but complete? Are my ideas linked in a logical way? Is my writing clear? Did I avoid providing the same information twice? Did I include sensory details, description, and dialogue if appropriate? And then you read the prose out loud. Also have someone else who's objective read and critique it. So I usually give my writing, whether I'm writing an article or I'm doing something bigger, I'll actually ask my husband to do it. He's a really great writing critique person to have, because he's a great critic, and he'll sit down, and he's not a genealogist. So if I'm writing something about genealogy or family history, if it makes sense to him, then I know I've done my job. Or if he says, oh, I don't really understand it, then I have to explain things a bit more clearly. And so he'll mark it up, and he's very honest, and he's very forthcoming. And so he'll say, nope, there's a cliche there, you've got to take that out, or you've said this twice, or what do you mean here? And so I can go back and then revise it. So it's really important to find somebody you trust. It could be a writing buddy in a writing workshop. It can be a fellow genealogist, a family member, a friend, just somebody that can give you honest feedback, and then you go back and revise. So I do offer writing services on my researchwriteconnect.com website. So I offer courses in writing. There's 3 different courses. They're called the Right Stuff. And one is the beginning course where you can just get jump started and learn how to actually get started with the project and how to tell the story. And then advancing the story, we talk about finishing the story, revising, adding footnotes, adding endnotes, and doing other things that make your story more complete. There's also a third course, which is mostly for people interested in publishing and selling their story. So it includes things that you have to think about when you're doing that, like copyright and legal issues and so forth. And then I offer one-on-one coaching, that you can book a coaching session with me, and I will read your prose and give you feedback. So all of the courses on Research Write Connect are self-paced. So you can sign up today, but if you don't have time to start it till the winter, you can start it whenever you'd like. And they have Facebook groups where you can interact with people or share your writing to get feedback, or you can email me directly and I will give you the feedback just myself. So there are a lot of options with the classes, but they're very flexible. So you don't have to have a certain start or end date. And I am running a special right now. So if you want to write this code down, it's summer 2021, summer 2021. And so it's $20 off of any course through the 31st of August. And so that's at researchwriteconnect.com. If you have any questions, you can always contact me, and I'll be happy to answer them. I also have done some self-publishing courses and some writing courses for Legacy Family Tree webinars. If you are a subscriber, you can get access to those webinars in their webinar library. So that is Legacy Family Tree. It's familytreewebinars.com. As I said, I have a lot of writing tools. Scrivener is one of them. There are many other tools out there that can help you plot your family history, do the mind maps, and I did include all of those in the handout because I didn't think I'd have time to go over each of them in this session. So I did include them in the handout. A lot of them are free. Some of them have free trials, and some of them you will have to pay for the full versions. But I shared some of my tools with you in that handout. So I'd like to conclude by saying, don't let your ancestors or their stories be reduced to just footnotes, that they deserve more than that. So I appreciate that sometimes we don't know a lot about every ancestor. So that's where the creativity comes in. You use the facts, you blend in social history, and even if you're just writing a 1 or 2 page story or a small profile, you just want to give voice to their silence. You just want to tell their story. So it's just not a set of boxes, lines, and charts. You want to give your ancestors that treatment, that they are important. And I really, really encourage people to write up the stories of their family. And my final thought is that you can't edit a blank page. I've been saying this since as long as I've been teaching writing, and that this is really important, that you must get something down. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It, as long as you have something to start with, you can always go back and revise it and improve it and edit it. So the hardest part is breaking through that blank screen or that blank page, but you have to start somewhere. So just remember that you can't edit a blank page. And I'd like to point you to my website, which is lisaalzo.com. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for. I don't spam you. I send tips, I send information, I send offers on the courses. And my website has more information on my publications as well. And that is lisaalzo.com. So I'd like to thank you for listening. And I'm ready to come on camera and take some questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was wonderful.
You're welcome.
And we have already quite a few questions that have come in
Great.
from the audience. And I have to say they're really insightful questions. So I'm looking forward to hearing the answers. So a whole bunch of people had questions about basically where do you draw the line between fiction and nonfiction writing? And so I'll start with the sort of the most broad question in that regard, which is, let's see, can you clarify the difference between historical fiction and creative nonfiction?
Yeah, so historical fiction, you're using events in history, but you're writing fiction. So some of it is made up. So when you're writing nonfiction, the assumption is that it's all true, but you're just using those techniques of description, creative storytelling, scene setting to actually tell the story. So you're not making anything up. You're not elaborating. You're sticking to the facts, but you're just presenting it in a creative way. So yeah, there's definitely a difference. Yeah, historical fiction, a lot of people they'll take events or people, but they'll actually create a story around that. And as long as you're clear to your reader at the beginning and you categorize what you're writing in the right way, then I think then you're okay. You want to make sure that you let people know, if you're writing historical fiction, that some of the scenes or some of the stories may have been embellished or elaborated on for creative content, or however you want to word that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a disclaimer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so that leads me to some more specific examples, or within that category. Can you make up dialogue that you believe is likely or typical in a work of creative nonfiction?
I would not do that. I wouldn't make anything up if you don't have it. Because you're running the risk of it's fictionalized. So again, unless you stayed up front, some of this is not, this is my own assumptions. For example, my book, I didn't know, what so I didn't include dialogue. But in the parts where, my mom was speaking, and she told me, then I made it sections of, I made it dialogue, because this was what she had said on the tape, and this is her speaking. So you have to be very careful with that. Because as soon as you start making something up, even if you assume that that's what they said, you don't know for sure.
Okay, so another attendee asks, my memories are from conversations 50 years ago. I'm worried about memorializing info that may not be accurate, either due to my memory being faulty or due to the fallibility of the source person, the person that they were, I guess, in conversation with. How do I deal with this uncertainty, and concern about making quote soft facts into hard facts.
Yeah, that's a little tricky, but if it's part of your story, so if this is how you remember it, then you just need to again be upfront at the beginning in an intro or preface and just say this is based on my recollections, and then you write it to the best of your ability. Everybody remembers things in different ways, so I would be clear that this is how you're remembering a conversation went, or something that happened, or this is what somebody told you. But and again, this is all an individual decision, is how much research do you do, and maybe you can find out if things happen in that exact way, and maybe you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, for example, I'll give you an example in my book. So my mom had told me about my great grandparents. So my grandmother's father was a tailor, and they weren't just peasant farmers, but a lot of men were leaving Slovakia to come to America. But for whatever reason, my great grandfather stayed, and I didn't know that. I don't know that for sure. I haven't found, the records in that area are a little sparse, so I haven't found anything definitive. But I just wrote that in there, that that I was told that perhaps this was the reason that he stayed, that he had a little bit of a better way to make a living than just being a peasant farmer. But there may have been other reasons that my research has not uncovered. So I can't say why he didn't leave for sure when so many were leaving. But but this was something that I just put in there, but I made it clear that this wasn't fact, that this was just my assumption.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Okay, so now a couple of questions about publishing.
Mm-hmm.
If my main audience for a book is my family, and I take a year to write this book, how can I market it to others to help me to defray the cost of publishing and printing?
Yeah. So usually what I tend to recommend to people, it depends on it depends on a lot of different factors, but yeah, generally you could just do a PDF or a certain number of copies, and then you could set up like a funding page, or a PayPal, or just email, contact people, and ask them. Also, you can do print on demand. So if you do something like lulu.com, what you can do is you can do ebook versions, PDF versions for free. You don't even have to charge anything. If you want to do a hard copy or a paperback, then of course Lulu takes a chunk out of that, but you can use the cost calculator, and then you can price it accordingly, and then people can buy it right from them. So you're not printing books yourself, so you're not spending a lot of money to get books printed that are just going to sit around. So you're not outlaying a lot of money. So using something like Lulu, which is a print on demand service. I know other people have used Blurb, but I haven't used Blurb, BLURB. So it depends on what the goal is. But with Lulu, you can even do ebooks, and you don't even have to charge for them. So there are a lot of different options, depending on your goal. But yeah, I mean, to market it, you would probably just have to contact people, through email, or, set up a family Facebook group or something like that, where you could, share bits and pieces, and then ask them, this, I want to finish this in a year, and would you be able to help defray the cost? So you have to kind of do your research and see what suits the type of book that you're trying to write. So I've helped some genealogists do some books on Lulu, and they have a very small audience, but basically they put it up there, they set a price, and then their family members go and buy the copy, and then they don't have to encounter any printing costs. It's all taken out at Lulu's end. and then it's just shipped directly to that person. So the print on demand option worked well for this person.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great option for
Mhm.
people who are really just looking for something
Yeah.
to share with their family.
Yeah.
Um, Another question about publishing. How long does a manuscript need to be to approach publishers?
Well, when you're saying approach publishers, if you're talking about a traditional publisher, then that's, it really varies. It depends on the subject matter and how you're publishing. So if you're looking at a local history press or something, they all have their own guidelines, but there's really no hard fast rule. I mean, mine was about 100 and I don't know, 25 pages or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Some are longer.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it depends on what type of publishing you're going to do. So if you're approaching a traditional publisher, they always have websites and guidelines, and they always state that, what the requirements are.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing an ebook, it can be short. I did a book that was less than 100 pages for somebody. It was just a small thin book of letters that I think it was his great grandmother that wrote, back and forth. And so it was very small, and I did it on Lulu, and it was very easy to produce. So it really depends on what your ultimate goal is.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay, a couple of questions about the writing process.
Mhm.
Um, can you give any tips for writing collectively? Like you're writing with, if someone was writing their family story with their sister, for example.
Yeah, so collaboration and writing with a co-author is challenging. Sometimes you have to get the voice right, so you have to kind of find a happy medium, blending the voice and the writing style together, and that takes a little work. But I think, if you sit down and do the brainstorming, the outline, okay, this is what we want to accomplish, this is the story we want to tell. And I think if you're clear from the beginning, what the focus is going to be and who's going to handle what parts, then I think it goes a little smoother than
Mhm.
if you're just kind of haphazardly each writing something. So you really have to trust the person. The book that I mentioned earlier with my elevator pitch, I'm actually working with a co-author on this particular book, not the basketball book, but the one on the cop.
Mm,
And so we have different perspectives, but we agreed that he would handle a certain part of this and I would handle another part. And so far it's worked okay.
mhm.
So you really have to trust the person and just and be comfortable with each other's writing style. But I think planning and being you know being aware of each other's strengths and weaknesses really helps.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you. Okay, this is an interesting question. Um, I have been asked to write about a Ukrainian family who spent the war in Kazakhstan, and I doubt I will be able to visit key places where this story takes place, obviously. Um, how would you suggest over like writing description of places that a person is not able to visit in person?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. So you want to do as much historical research as you can. And so, you can always start with, a Google Earth or a Google map and see what it looks like. If there's a way to, because Google Earth is pretty powerful. It gets right in there. And then you want to see what's been published, what's been written about the place, or what can you find, either online, or, you can do Google Books, you can do, libraries, you can, universities that have good Ukrainian collections. There's a Ukrainian historical center in New Jersey, that you can see if there's somebody that knows about that similar type of story or place, and so I would I would just see what you can find out there that's social history, because if you can't travel there, maybe there's another account somewhere that you can at least read for background information that might be able to include, you might be able to, include, based on that. So yeah, it's a little challenging if you can't go there and do it yourself, but there are resources out there. If you just try to get some outside research with, like I said, organizations or museums or historical societies, or and like I said, Google Earth, Google Maps are good. Any kind of historic accounts of these places might work well.
Let's see. There's a lot of questions.
It's okay.
At this point, I'm not sure that we'll be able to get to all of them, but I will
just do as many as you can. And people can always email me if they have some burning question that we didn't get to.
Yes,
they can send me an email. That's fine.
Okay. How do you deal with information about an ancestor that involves criminality, illegitimate births, or other things that relatives may not want to hear about?
That's a good question.
Do you need any living relatives' permission to include such things in your narrative?
So if the person is dead, generally, dead men tell no tales. No, but so there's moral and ethic and legal.
Right.
So you have to be aware of what the focus of your book is, and what the purpose is, and who is it really going to hurt? So while it may be legal because the person is dead, is it going to cause problems in your family? Is it going to hurt somebody? Is it a direct impact? Or if it's generations ago, what is the impact? And so, for example, when you said illegitimacy, in my book, my grandmother came to America because her sister had an illegitimate child, and she accompanied this niece of hers. They came together on the ship, and that was part of the story. And as I was doing my research, so the woman had already died when I was going to publish my thesis in my book, the illegitimate child. She'd already died, but her children were still alive. And my mother, our family had a relationship with them. And I said, my mother said, she was illegitimate, and I had done the research, and all this was proven. And I said, so I called them up at that time, and I talked to each of the children, and I said, I want to put this in the book. Is it okay? I don't really need your permission, but I'm asking it as part of the family. And they said, it's fine. It happened. We know it. And I wasn't writing an expose of the family. It was an important factor of why my grandmother came to America. So it wasn't like I wasn't dwelling on this illegitimacy. I was telling the story. So I think you have to judge for yourself. But if you ever have any legal questions, you really should consult like an attorney. If you're going to publish this in the public, and it's going to be out there, then if you have any questions, you should always err on the side of caution. But generally, if anything's in public record, so like if you're dealing with a criminal ancestor and there's, it's a criminal case, it's in court, it's in public record, it's in the newspaper, generally that's fair game. And especially if it happened 50, 60, 70, years ago, it's really not going to have a direct impact, so to speak, on anybody living. So, you just have to kind of use your best judgment with that. But usually if it's public record, it's fair game. But then you also have to have all the other considerations. So I know that it's a really sensitive subject with because people are doing DNA testing now and finding all sorts of secrets that people may not want their business aired in public. And so I think you just have to be careful when you're dealing with more recent happenings, and if there's people that it's going to hurt. And again, it comes down to your relationship with that family line and your, what you're trying to accomplish with this book. If it's just being shared within the family, then, that's more of a personal conversation. But if you're going to put it out there in public and it could harm somebody in some way, then you really have to think about it and think how you're going to write it. So there's a lot of it depends in these
Yeah, of
situations,
course.
but that's how I guided myself. I mean, I have to be honest with you. When I did my research for my book and my thesis, I interviewed all of my aunts and uncles and my mother on tape. I interviewed her 5 times, and each time I asked her permission to record it. And then, can I include this information in the story? And it was my own mother, but I knew that I wanted to publish it someday. So I knew that, I wanted to make sure that, people were comfortable with some of the parts of the story being out there. So that's how I approached it as a writer. And that's my best advice, is to always, use caution. And like I said, legal, moral, ethical are not always on the same plane.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we are coming to the end of our time today. So I would like you, if you would please, oh, it's actually already up here, your contact
Yep,
information.
I did.
So, oh wait, you just
Sorry.
turned it off.
Sorry. Hang on. Okay, there it is.
Perfect.
Yep, it's Lisa at lisaalzo.com, or just Google me on my website will come up. There's a button there that you can contact me through too.
So if you have any burning questions that we didn't get to today, please feel free to reach out to Lisa.
Absolutely.
And I just want to thank you again for, I think, breaking down what can seem like a very daunting endeavor into something that's much more manageable for people, and clarifying a lot of these questions about like how to be faithful to the facts of in one's family history, and how to deal with potentially troubling information in one's family history and things like that. So thanks so much for all of that. And thank you all for joining us today as well. And we look forward to seeing you at future programs. So with that, I think time to sign off for today.
Well, thanks for having me, and good luck, everyone. I appreciate the time.